everyone. Since people have sort of joined and it's shortly after noon, I wanted to get us started. My name is Lacey. I am the Administrative and Program Coordinator for the California Association of Museums. We're so excited to have you join us today, and we're really happy to have Tim and Emma with Free the Museum here. So I just want to give a few housekeeping before we get started. First of all, just that the program is being recorded, and it will be emailed to you and posted to YouTube following today's program. And if you encounter any issues or have any questions, please feel free to message me directly in the chat or send me an email at admin@calmuseums.org, and I will do my best to address your question. So now I'm going to introduce Tomoko Kuta, who is the chair of CAM's program committee, to introduce today's program. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lacey. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As we begin this event, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. And land acknowledgement is a critical step towards working with Native communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. We honor and are grateful for the land we occupy and recognize the ongoing damage of settler colonialism. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon, and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay peoples. I encourage you to name and acknowledge the Native peoples where you are located in the chat box. On behalf of the program committee, I'd like to welcome you all to this ReMuseum program. Recover, reimagine, revive. We're seeing lots of great entries in the chat box, so thank you for that. What does ReMuseum mean to you? Thank you for joining this virtual conversation to delve deeply into the challenges that the museum field is currently facing and how our field can move forward. In this series, members of our program committee are in dialogue with special guests who have knowledge or experience to help us consider new perspectives or explore new directions for our field. Let me remind you that CAM has a board-approved code of conduct for participation in our programs. A link was sent to you in the confirmation for this program, but Lacey is also going to paste a link in our chat box for your convenience. CAM is committed to providing a safe, inclusive, and respectful learning and networking experience for everyone. I'd like to introduce our program committee members who will lead today's discussion. We have Karen Kienzle, and she will take it from here.
Great, thanks, Tomoko. So I think we could all use a little bit of distraction today. And so I'm really excited to have Tim and Emma here to talk about liberating the museum into outdoor spaces. Tim McNeil is a professor in the UC Davis Department of Design, director of the UC Davis Design Museum, and a principal with the design practice Muñiz McNeil. He has spent 30 years as a practicing exhibition designer working for major museums, researching exhibition design history and methods, and teaching the next generation of exhibition design thinkers and practitioners. His award-winning work has been featured and cited in multiple publications and media outlets. Emma Thorne-Christy is an independent exhibition designer, activist, and artist based in Los Angeles. She works with museums, libraries, and cultural centers to design imaginative learning environments that challenge and inspire visitors. With a BA in American Studies and an MFA in Museum Exhibition Design and a previous career in community organizing, she aims to inspire civic engagement and to spur real societal change through her work. Welcome, Tim and Emma. We're so excited that you took the time to be with us today.
Thank you for that introduction.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tomoko, Lacey, Karen, for that introduction. I'm going to start things off, right, Emma?
Yeah.
And so say a little bit about Free the Museum. We're going to introduce it briefly, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms, one set with Emma, one set with me, and do a little exercise and discussion, then come back together for a larger conversation as a bigger group. Free the Museum grew out of a project led by Michael Burns in Baltimore, the Omni Museum, if any of you are familiar with that project, which is an initiative to basically celebrate that the museum is everywhere. It's all around us. The ubiquitous museum is how Michael would describe it. It seemed that during this time and COVID-19 and the challenges that museums are facing in terms of welcoming visitors inside their buildings and in terms of engaging them with their content and exhibitions, that there was definitely a moment of synergy here with what Omni Museum was about and the fact that museums were struggling, or at least unable necessarily to welcome people in the same way they normally do. So the initiative was about how can we move the museum from the indoor space into the outdoor space and celebrate really our environment and what's around us and make those connections. It's a brainchild of a few different people. Of course, Emma and I are included, Michael Burns, Tricia Austin, who's in London, Andrea Jones, and Betsy Loring, who are on the East Coast. We're the sort of core team for Free the Museum. So, as I mentioned, COVID-19 presents these challenges, and it really is about how do we then activate the outdoor space? How do we make that a museum space or a space for people to engage and come together as a community around some of the content that we're typically presenting in museums, but more importantly, using the skills from a lot of people like you, who are museum professionals and practitioners, who have these amazing skills that could be basically put to use in a much broader and wider context. So I'm going to turn it over to Emma to say a few more words about Free the Museums and the specifics of the initiative.
Yeah, so there are 5 main benefits to the idea of bringing the museum outside of the physical structure of the museum institution. Obviously, the first one that is on everyone's minds right now with the pandemic is it's a safe place to learn outside. And I think that's really relevant because as we're thinking about, time ticketing, limited entrance, directional flow inside of our spaces, right, eventually when we're allowed to open in California, we're going to see a limited number of people for quite a while being able to come into the museum. And with that, also the number of people that are motivated to actually come back to the museum. And if you're bringing the museum outside, you're allowing a lot more people to view your exhibit or your programming. And that might be on your museum's physical space. Maybe there's a garden outdoor area, or that could be within the community at large and other places. And in doing so, in bringing the museum outside, you're lowering the barriers to entry, right? For a lot of folks that might say, I don't do art, I don't get history, I'm not into science. By having these places stumble upon in nature, I love that term, like you walk into it. You might be at a farmer's market, you might be on an escalator, and you're just coming across it versus having to definitively decide to go into it. That is going to present so many more opportunities to bring new visitors into your museum. It puts objects and content in context. You're not in a white cube, you're physically in an environment and able to really elevate the outdoor environments that you're engaging with. And I think a really big element of Free the Museum is that we're encouraging museum professionals to go a bit rogue. We're not saying, your whole museum needs to have buy-in, your leadership needs to have buy-in. We're really encouraging museum professionals and perhaps those that are unemployed or underemployed at the moment to think about how they can use their museum skills, as Tim mentioned, to activate outdoor environments. So these can be, grassroots, low budget, prototype-like experiences. And lastly, it is an opportunity to engage in your community and also with your community. So we're encouraging people when they're thinking about these to not think about just like this being a gift to your community, but really a collaborative process with the people that you're hoping to engage with. So we were told CAM does not want a lot of slides. As designers, we were like, oh my gosh, we're not allowed to use pictures. So Tim and I were like, okay, well, we're going to try to use our verbal skills to talk through two examples. So I'm going to give an example of a low budget, kind of small project, and then Tim will give an example of the complete opposite side, more long, bigger, more expensive thinking. So our small example is this neighbor in Maryland decided to activate her chicken coop, right? So during COVID, like everyone in the beginning was really into neighborhood walks. Maybe they still are in your area. And everyone would come by and ask the neighbor when she was outside cleaning up the chickens, like, oh, what are their names? Like, why do they have all these weird feathers? This one doesn't look like this one. And she decided to create some really simple object labels of her chicken. So she like took the photo of the chicken and then she wrote its name and a little thing about like what this chicken was. And people loved it. Such a simple, brilliant way to museumify a chicken coop. Tim, your example.
Okay, and on the contrast to that, one that I know that many of you are familiar with is at, say, the Exploratorium. When they first opened and are clearly continuing now, they have many outdoor exhibits that deal with the science of the water and the atmosphere and what's going on around there at the pier itself. So this is a much more expansive, clearly more expensive type of interventions they've created there in the pier. But again, they're outdoors, open 24 hours, available to most people. But the other thing about that too is that program has now expanded into the city of San Francisco and into the Bay Area. So it started locally around the museum, but now has begun to pop up in other parts of the city as well. So it shows how you could start small, but really increase the magnitude of it and have many, many different locations and venues for it as well.
So instead of talking through countless examples, we really wanted to use this time to help you think about how would you free your museum, even if you're not necessarily employed by a museum, but just this concept. So we're going to break out into two rooms. As Tim said, we're going to lead an activity. We'll come back together. We encourage you, if you're in a place where you can, to turn on your screen so we can. How did it go?
Oh, it was terrible. No, it was fantastic. Of course, it was great. It was really good ideas. It was great to hear from everyone about, you know, different ways to use those tactic cards and some of the projects that have been thought of already or are ongoing. So should we had some kind of, we're open to sort of a general discussion around this, but we had some broader, bigger questions too we could ask. But I think, you know, if there are any themes, Emma, that came up in your breakout session, it'd be good to hear those and I'll report back a little on mine.
Totally. I mean, what I found the most fascinating was people came in, you know, we asked everyone to identify their audience, their content, and their location. And what I loved about this challenge was we didn't say what order you had to do those. So we saw some people choosing their audience first, some, you know, an outdoor space, and some just the experience that they wanted or the tactic they wanted to use. And I love that because I think, you know, as an exhibit designer, we're always first focused on the content, right? But if we're thinking in new ways, maybe the content isn't driving the Free the Museum project. Other things that came up, a lot of people talking about outdoor spaces like gardens that are either on their campus or adjacent to their campus. Thinking about farmers markets, I love that idea. A lot of people wanted to do something with soundscapes, either, you know, on your handheld device or more environmental soundscapes through speakers and that kind of things. And we talked a lot about projections and kind of putting things on building walls. So those were our major themes. What about you?
Yeah, similar things, but also about this idea of surfaces. I mean, looking around your museum or in the immediate vicinity of a large concrete area that might provide a platform or a canvas for chalk marking to the side of a building that might be really great for a projection. And that those ideas of, as you were saying, rather than necessarily being about content for an exhibition, it also becomes sort of a marketing tool to some degree too, because I think that's the important thing to think about here is yes, you could definitely connect to the collection, that's great and get it out there, but it also becomes a way of engaging people in the museum in a way you may not have been able to do before, or at least connecting them to promoting the museum as an institution for people to go there later, or at least to know that it's actually there. I think one of the other things that came up was just about, you know, we talk about being free the museum, but of course, many museums are clearly dependent on revenue. So if you start to offer things outside for free, then is that taking away from potential revenue for those experiences indoors? So how do you get that balance right so that it is, you know, taking over from that, but is seen as a add-on that augments potentially the indoor experience later down the line, or at least doesn't prevent the fee paying part of it as well. I think just some logistics as well about, you know, trying to use things that already exist. Talked about signs that already existed for a garden that could be repurposed and used again. So yeah, some good discussion. One question I have out there is, you know, we've talked here about this idea of moving the museum and activating it in the outdoor space, but why is it that museums maybe don't do that as much as they should? I mean, there are clearly some samples, but what are the barriers to doing that? We talked about cost of entrance. Are there other ones too? And we could just generally touch on that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I hear a lot is durability, right? How much more it can kind of cost to bring things outside, even if it's on your campus. And so there is a paywall to enter it. Is tricky. I think in California, though, we do have to challenge that and say, well, this can be used actually more year round than in other parts, right, of the world. When we talk about Free the Museum, like with people in Finland, they're like, well, this is happening.
Crazy.
So what's the point here? And we're going into a very dark winter. But in California, we really have a lot of opportunities. Do other people have, you know, thoughts about this? Have they pushed this question to their board or community?
I just want to highlight that in the chat, Adrian has come in with identifying codes, rules, regulations, liability, all those things that kind of impact prevent us from considering something outside. I might also say, you know, limited staffing. I think for those museums where it's challenging to even program the spaces that we have, thinking about a whole other space with kind of limited staffing capacity could seem really challenging.
Definitely. This is where I love to think about. Adrian, did you have something to say?
I was just going to ask Karen, because I know you have had the Patrick Doherty's outside, and those seem very much in line with this, overcoming those kind of challenges for that project.
Yeah, so we had two Patrick Doherty large-scale installations at the Palo Alto Art Center. One that actually came down this summer because part of it actually lost its structural integrity and posed a liability issue and a safety issue. So, but their logistics around, it was a temporary installation. So we were able to kind of coordinate permits because it was temporary. Some safety concerns were mitigated through the frequent application of a fire retardant because it was essentially made of sticks. But yeah, there are definitely some concerns there.
This is where I think partnerships really help, right? Like if there's an open, especially during the pandemic, an open institution that does have visitorship or, clientele or what have you, to be looking to them and seeing if there's ways to elevate those things. I mean, I remember a few months ago, the Sacramento Bee was giving away their newspaper cases that you put in, a coin. All you had to do was go and pick it up, and I was going to try to convince Tim to go get one for me. But I was just thinking, wow, what a cool opportunity. Those things are made to be outside. You mount them to the ground. No one's got to touch it. Yeah, maybe your staff goes there, like once a week to restock if there's something people take out of it. But that is a case that already exists in the world. People know what it is, but activating it in a different way could be a really interesting opportunity to promote the museum. Because I don't think what Free the Museum is saying is get rid of your indoor exhibits, get rid of your indoor programming, but how do we bring a little bit of it outside during this time, and how can that actually elevate what you're doing inside? And I think what museums, our strongest hold right now during the pandemic is to say, we're still here. We're not going anywhere. We are institutions in your community, and we are continue to contribute in maybe some new ways while you can't necessarily come inside with us.
I'd like to just say a little bit more about the pragmatic issues around codes, liabilities, and permissions. I mean, Free the Museum, as Emma will attest, for some of our members, has an activist component to it, because asking all those permissions sometimes can get in the way of a great idea. Clearly, you don't want to put anyone in any danger or set yourself up for any legal issues, and that's not what we would clearly be advocating for. But at the same time, there's something to be said for just doing something if you know that the boundaries and the context for it is safe. And I'll just give some examples of projects I've done through the Design Museum at UC Davis with students, where we'll do projection mapping walking tours, and we just carry around a little portable projector at night, and we project films we've made onto buildings that tell the history of that building. And at the end of the evening, with this massive crowd of people following us around who are into this activity, and it really is not that complicated. We don't really ask permission to do it because we're not really doing any harm. I mean, clearly you've got to weigh up each situation. But I feel that having a little bit of that spontaneity and that willingness just to take that bit of a risk is often what's needed, because maybe that's one of the barriers we find within our various institutions, is that when we have to go through so many approvals like we do for many exhibitions, for good reason, that can sometimes stymie an idea, or at least weaken it or not allow it to happen. So there is an element, I think, in doing this of taking initiative and running with it a little bit, and not, and not necessarily always asking permission.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of speak to people that might be not in a museum right now, or might be interested in doing something outside of their museum in their copious amounts of spare time. So I'm an independent exhibit designer. So I'm my own boss, so I get in trouble with myself if I do something wrong, or I just don't get that client again, which, maybe happens, knock on wood doesn't. But I lived for 6 years in Echo Park, around Echo Park Lake in Los Angeles, which has a extremely swiftly growing homeless population. So you're seeing this lake that was revamped about 8 years ago to make it really friendly to families and joggers and that kind of thing. And then you saw a lot of unhoused folks come and use it as a sanctuary for tents and that kind of thing. And I started having these questions with myself and people in my life around, what is the purpose of a lake? Why are there people living here? Is that an appropriate use of this public park? And so in my own research and dialogue with community representatives, stakeholders, that kind of thing, I started learning more about this. And I thought, there's a lot of people that aren't going to be doing this much of their own research about what's going on here. This lake could really use some interpretation about it. There were existing interpretive signs around the lake that were about 36 by 24 inches that talked about, the lotus flowers at this lake, the history of why this lake exists, that kind of thing. And I just decided to go rogue. And I made 8 new signs around the lake that were about homelessness in Los Angeles and about at this lake, what people were doing, resources for people that were unhoused. I got a printer that I normally work with to print them at cost for me, and I mounted them without city approval just one morning. No one stopped me. I did it in a non-permanent way where they could easily be removed, and no one took them down for 8 days. I was prepared to get in trouble legally. I had like a lawyer. I knew when I knew who I would go to if I got in trouble, but there were no negative repercussions. And I put a website on the bottom of each graphic, and we got 500 hits in those 8 days. That is crazy. I think what that also shows is, because I'm a museum professional, I understand how we tell stories effectively, how we do so in a way that does not alienate people, how we state the facts in engaging ways. I wasn't saying, like these people need to be here. I was just saying, this is why people are here. This is what's available to them. This is what's not available to them, which is motivating them to stay here. This is how you can be a good neighbor. And the reaction was overwhelmingly so positive. I would just walk around like a park goer and ask people why these signs were here, which is my favorite thing to do in any exhibit. But I think what this shows, that exhibit cost me under $500. It took me 8 months. But a great example of Free the Museum, using your skills and talents as a museum professional that understands critical thinking, narrative storytelling, visitor experience, and bringing those to the outside world. So we've got lots of examples of this on our website, freethemuseum.org. We also have a Pinterest page that I think is really helpful. So there's examples, that aren't necessarily, that we're just inspired by ourselves. So you can find all of those, and we're actively taking submissions from museums and individuals with those. So you could read about what other people are doing. And, Tim and I are part of a collection, as you said, of activators. And what our role kind of in this is to help support other people doing this kind of stuff. So if you want to talk to someone, in the UK about what's going on, Trisha Austin is there, can help you figure that out. We've got people that are more into education, more into design, more into content development. So that's all on the website. But we're really seeing this as an initiative that moves beyond COVID-19. This is something that should be more long-lasting. It already exists in forms, as our Pinterest page will attest. Artists are doing this. Museum people are doing this. Weird neighbors that have lots of chickens are doing this. But I think we're putting a name to it, right? And really harvesting kind of a collective value in this kind of approach to the world. I'm off my soapbox, Tim.
You do that well, Emma. No, it's great. I think Emma just really gave the passion behind this for us as well, about how we feel that museum professionals like yourself have so much to offer, and we're often cooped up within our buildings, working within our teams there. But how do we break free of that a little and maybe contribute to our communities and share our skills in a broader way, and on a whole variety of different levels and on different projects. I wonder if there's questions, because I want to make sure that we have time to answer those. Yeah.
There are a couple of things that also came up in the chat. I just wanted to kind of share that a partner for many museums, if you are in a community that has a public art program, just to kind of go back to Adrian's question, we have worked with the public art program in the city of Palo Alto. They do all sorts of permits. So they're a great partner. They know how to do this. There's also a very kind of emerging trend in public art around temporary public art. And also, we just did a recent installation of billboards and had to reduce the height so that we could avoid a permit. So small things like that. Yeah. Ian Hart in the comments talks about capacity as an issue, also appetite for risk, and then concerns around, is it going to be too scrappy for our kind of institutional appearance, et cetera?
And that's a great question about being too scrappy. We talked at length about that. About letting go, that there is, that there has to be a certain amount of letting go of maybe polish or finish, that what you may be accustomed to or used to doing with inside the museum, you'll have to let go of outdoors. I mean, also because of cost may be a factor for that, but also just depending on how long you want it to be out there for, it may, other people may want to participate in it in ways you don't want them to as well. So having it to be a little more temporary and more fleeting, I think, is part of the spirit of it too, and not to get too precious about it. And you're absolutely right, that sometimes means letting go of an expectation that everyone has within your institution and being okay with that.
I just wanted to share, so I'm with the new Children's Museum in San Diego, and we are mostly an indoor facility. But because of what's happening and because of the way we're looking at our new normal, we are actually making plans and writing grants for a program that is going to extend our footprint to a city park across the street. Now, we don't have the partners for it yet, so there's the whole legal thing that we have to go through. But I think it makes so much sense. Families are looking to be together, to be outdoors, to be engaged. And I know that prior to COVID, our attendance was going out, was skyrocketing. So we want to be able to continue to engage the families, and this shift, and your topic today is just right on. So
thanks.
yeah, and I think it's professional.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to finish. You're on your soapbox. I have my soapbox too. I think we're in this field because we want to expand our audiences to be accessible. So I think this all just makes a lot of sense.
So Tomoko, give you a quick resource. The Skirball Cultural Center is also trying to pull their stuff outside, and it's kids focused. So if you want some support with that, they're doing that too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else people want to share? Questions, things are resonating.
There's a few things in the chat.
Sorry, that's
I
me.
don't read, I'm a soundscape.
I'm putting those in there if people are interested in maybe participating in a project like this and want to find funding sources. I believe it's the city of Santa Monica did a microgrant project that engaged performing and visual artists to do interventions. And then similarly, the city of Palo Alto is launching one as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, I just build on that and say, I agree, Karen, that in the city of Davis, there's an arts coordinator, and I work with her all the time on projects. And they really can be the path to getting things done because they know how to navigate the city audiences and codes. Yeah.
So we've got 2 more minutes. Any other kind of burning questions for Emma and Tim before we close? Well, this was definitely the inspiration that I needed today. And I want to thank Emma and Tim for the ideas, the instigation, the catalyst to encourage me to think about different ways that I can activate the out of doors now and into the future as we start thinking about recovery and post-COVID life. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Lacey, for all of your coordination, and Tomoko.
Of course. And I'll just kind of wrap up and give a little bit of a teaser for next week. Karen, thank you for bringing this talk together. It's really, really great. And all the participants who spent time together brainstorming great ideas. So you will be receiving a link to a program evaluation. So please take the few minutes to send your feedback. And then next week's program is focused on, exploring virtual programs. So it's really an extension of how we're all managing the changes that we're going through. And then please be sure to check back on CAM's website for more information and to register for future ReMuseum programs. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.